Hello. Okay, so for this one, we'll go through what macros are and recording macros. So we already opened up the Visual Basic developer tool pack and saw where you can write code, and macros are where your programs are going to show up and you can run them from this little screen. This next little bit, I'm going to show you how to record a macro, which is the easiest way to code. In a sense, Excel is actually going to write the code for you. It doesn't get easier than that. Okay, so what we're going to do when we hit record macro is this thing is going to just record everything you do in Excel. So if you know how to type in equations, fill in cells, do calculations, and it's something that you need to do over and over and over again, recording how you do it once is the easiest way, and Excel will actually create the code for you. So we're going to try that out with an example problem. And the example problem we're going to solve is 3 equations, 3 unknowns. You'll see this in a lot of different applications. There's a challenge statics problems in there if you want to try it on a mechanics problem. If you walk through algebraically, 3 equations, 3 unknowns. So here's an example with 3 different equations, and you can look at the manipulations that happen here. And the problem with method 1 is it's going to be slightly different depending on what numbers you're dealing with. Okay, so 1 plus 2 goes to 3. That's only going to work for this one scenario, and we need something that could be applied no matter what these 3 equations are. So we're going to go ahead and try out method 2, which uses matrices. So instead of some specific case where we have these numbers that we're only going to solve for this scenario, we're going to try this out for method 2, which is where we have just kind of generic. And if you haven't gone through these, Khan Academy actually has some really good videos walking through how to use matrix manipulations for solving systems of equations like this. But essentially what we're going to do is take this 3 by 3 matrix and we're going to pull it over onto the other side of the equation by taking the inverse of it. And this is quite tedious to do by hand. Again, I'm going to refer you to the Khan Academy video to see how to take the inverse of a 3 by 3 matrix. And it's possible, but it's really painful. So this is quite a good example for a situation where you'd want to write a program that would do these kinds of manipulations. So we're going to solve for what x, y, and z is, the same thing down here, but we're going to do it through taking the inverse of a matrix, just to show you what that looks like. So I plugged this into Mathematica, and if you had just various random numbers in here, these are the equations that you would have to type in order to get the inverse of that matrix. Luckily, Excel has these functions already built, so that means we are not going to have to plug these equations in by hand, which would be really tedious. You could do it. It's there, but wow, it's going to be a lot easier to use Excel's awesome library that's already there. So this is an example of creating a program that within the program, we're going to use some pre-built functions that will help us out immensely and make this into a nice, short, and tidy code instead of a very long and drawn out complicated code that would be easy to make mistakes in. Okay, and here's plugging in the numbers, what that would look like. So 1x shows up right here, -3 times y, 3z. So again, if you haven't done manipulations like this before, translating these 3 equations and 3 unknowns, that's what it would look like on this format. So here's -4, 15, 19, -4, 15, 19. And again, in this scenario, we're going to try and solve for x, y, z. So first we're going to have to take the inverse of this guy, which will turn into 1/9, 2/9. So here's our 1/9, 2/9, 1/9. And this multiplied by our 4, 15, 19 will give us our x, y, z. So when we multiply these 2 matrices by one another, and that looks like 1/9 times -4, 1/9 times -4, 2/9 times 15, 1/9 times 19, and that will give us 5. And then the next column down, 1/27 times -4. So the first times the top, the second times the middle, the third times the bottom. We'll do that for each of these guys, and that will actually solve this for us. So we will get x equals 5, y equals 1, z is equal to -2. Okay, so this is going to involve a couple different things. Learning how to use Excel's function, which is a little bit different than the other functions that we've had in that this is going to apply to a whole block of cells rather than just one single cell. So we're going to use Control, Shift, Enter to evaluate. This is a really important part of it. So Enter is what you do to evaluate the cell in just one little block versus we're going to highlight this whole thing and evaluate the whole thing at once. So Control, Shift, Enter. So stop yourself from pressing Enter. Don't hit Enter. We're going to have to press all three of those together. Okay, so let me go ahead and go over to Excel, and I'm going to set this up with my 3 equations, 3 unknowns, and then I'll set up another scenario where Excel will fill in that inverse for me, and I can go through the rest of it. And I'm going to do a little bit more. I will set it up recording the macro. So if I can get through it once, it will have it in there for me for future uses as well. Okay, so here we are back in Excel. This is that same spreadsheet we used when we were trying out creating our own functions in VBA. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a new sheet, and I will kind of put the template in here for the user to input their information, and we're going to do 3 equations, 3 unknowns in here. I went ahead and just snipped a copy of that equations just for notes, so this will help me set up my matrix over here. So we're going to do a 3x3 matrix. I'll go ahead and do just a little bit of formatting there, add some borders and put some color in here. And if you remember how to translate these equations into a 3x3, so the first equation is 1x, -3y, 3z. It can be pretty easy to make a mistake here when you're typing these in. So if there's any error in what you're calculating, kind of go back through these numbers, make sure you have the right sign. So we have 4, -3, -1. Okay, so there's our 3x3. We can go ahead and center that and maybe change those column widths a little bit. That looks more like a row. And then we're going to multiply this. So here's merge, and we'll center that. So this is, we're going to multiply it by our next matrix, which is just x, y, z. So I'll go ahead and make that a different color. We'll go ahead and center these guys too. So this will be x, y, z. And when we multiply these guys together, we will get our -4, 15, 19. So I'll go ahead and merge this, wrap text. I want to put equal sign in here as a string, not as trying to start up a calculation. If I put a space first, then it will let me type that in as text and it won't come up with a, what are you trying to calculate kind of error. Okay, so here's our last little chunk. Actually, if I want, I can just Control C, Control V, and maybe just change the color around on that. Okay, so this is going to be our -4, 15, and 19. Okay, so that is those 3 equations, 3 unknowns set up in matrix form, and the next chunk down, we want to rearrange this to solve for it. And it's going to look kind of similar. So I'm going to go ahead and just Control C, Control V that. And this time I'm going to clear it out. So this will be, maybe I'll move that down just a little bit. Okay, so this is going to be where we use our matrix inverse. So, and we're going to put our 3 by 3 matrix in here. So that's the Excel function that we'll be using down here. And we're going to switch these two columns then. So this column, I guess we can just say Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V. It might be nice to link up these guys so that our input only has to be put in at this original place, and then everything down below would be filled in based on what's going on up here. So this is our input, and this is going to be our what's coming out of our program. Okay, some interesting things here for how we're going to set this up. So this is where we're going to use our matrix multiply, and we'll do our 3 by 3, comma, and then we'll do our 1 by 3 is what we're gonna multiply these two guys together. As I do this, I'm gonna kind of go through this fairly quickly, but you can rewatch it. So I'm not just gonna fill it out. I'm gonna fill it out while I'm also recording it. And I'm gonna record it using relative references. And that means I can copy and paste these tables other places in my worksheet and redo the calculation. So without that, if it's not selected, then it's going to just go to this spot in the spreadsheet. If this is selected, I can copy and paste it and put it other places and do it just relative to whatever starting cell. So if I'm going to use a relative starting cell, I have to decide where to start from. So I'll go ahead and start from right here. Make that bold. So that means before I hit the record button, I'm going to make sure that my cursor is at my starting location. If you lose track of where you start, then you have to kind of re-record it. And then when I start recording here, it's going to record my mistakes or if I mess up on anything. So you might have to practice this a couple times. I'll show you where to delete it out if you have to, stop and retry it a few times, but it usually takes a few times before you get this in here right. And then also, let me put a little note in here that when we evaluate these functions, we're going to use not enter, but Control plus Shift plus enter. So that's another very important part of it, is that we're going to evaluate it with Control Shift Enter, and we're going to evaluate a whole bunch of stuff all at once. Okay, so here we go. Developer and use relative reference is selected. It's dark gray. And now we're going to hit the record button. First thing to do is give our program a name. So I'm going to call this 3 unknowns. And you're going to want to keep this to a word with no like exclamation points or weird characters in here. So just pick the best word for this. Shortcut key, so maybe T for 3. I don't know. And then it's always kind of courteous to add commentary within your code. So you can say, this macro calculates 3 unknowns from 3 equations using MMULT and matrix multiply. Okay, and you can go back and change those comments later on, but kind of get in the habit of doing this and making sure all your codes have some text explaining what's happened here. Okay, so we have our starting cell in the right spot. We've got our name, our shortcut key. We are ready to start. So I'll say okay, and we are recording. You can see up here, yay, we're recording. So the first thing we're going to do is take the inverse of that matrix. Now this is a little bit different. Notice I'm highlighting the entire 3 by 3 block of cells here, not just one cell. And then I'm going to start typing my equation into 9 cells at once. This is a little bit different. So while it's highlighted, I'm going to hit the equal sign, and this is actually going to put the equation into everything that's highlighted right now. So here's my matrix inverse, and you can see that it's coming up with some little help screens here. And then I'm also going to highlight not a row or a column, but the entire 3x3 input that we're taking the inverse of here. And this is where stop yourself, not enter. We're doing Control, Shift, Enter. And that evaluates the entire thing. Okay, so there's our inverse has been taken. The next step is we are going to multiply, and this is going to be similar. So I'm highlighting the entire block of cells here, and I will type the equation into the entire block. So equals matrix multiply, and this one is going to take 2 arrays into it. So here's my first array. I'm highlighting the entire thing, comma, and here is the second array. So this is a little bit trickier than some of the other functions we've used. So there we go. We're multiplying these two guys together, and we're not going to hit enter. Control, Shift, Enter. And there we go. That's our answer. That's what XYZ is equal to. I like to, before I stop recording, I'm going to come back to my starting cell and then hit stop recording. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to test this out by deleting it. Okay, so now there's nothing left in these cells. They're completely blank. I'm going to go to my starting cell, macro, and there's 3 unknowns. That's the macro I just recorded. I can run it from here. So boom, it just filled in everything for me. The other way I can do is to try out my shortcut key. So if you remember when we first open it up, and if you forgot to set that shortcut key, if you go down here to options, so macro, 3 unknowns, options, I can reset that shortcut key right here if I want to. I can update my comment field. Okay, so that was my shortcut key, so I'll try it. So I'm going to hit Control T, and that fills it in too. Pretty neat. There's one more thing we can try out, and that is to add a little form control button. So I'll go ahead and say insert, and we'll just keep it simple over here and draw a little button. And it's going to grab that button and say, what program would you like this button to run? So we'll select 3 unknowns. If you have more than one macro going on in the spreadsheet, then it'll have the whole list of everything on there. Or if you ever want to reassign a button, just right click on it and you can say assign macro to that button. So we'll say 3 unknowns. So there we go. And we can come over here and right click on here. So we can say solve 3 equations, 3 question marks. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to go to my start cell and then click on my button, and the button will now solve it for me. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so I went through that pretty fast, and most people, this is going to take quite a few go-arounds before you get through this. At the very end, what your code should look like. So let's go ahead and we can edit it, and this will open up our Developer Studio. So here is our code. Remember, we had this set to use the relative. So we have rows and columns here, RC, R, RC, and that was the use relative references. So we have a starting cell over here, but then everything else is rows and columns from that starting cell. Let's go ahead and copy this over. And let's say we have an entire spreadsheet with a whole bunch of different, it's like your algebra homework or something. So let's copy this, Control C, and maybe we have a whole worksheet that we're working through a 50 problem set or something. And we say, that's too much homework. I'm going to write a program to do it all for me. Don't tell your math teachers that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to see if it works at multiple locations. Okay, so this time I'm going to come down here. So we're at a new location, a new set of cells. I'm moving to the start that's right here at kind of the same position, and we'll hit our button, and it's working at multiple locations. So that's the advantage of using that relative reference. So be sure you have that selected before you start recording. If you record it and you mess up and you have to redo it, come up here and actually delete that macro. You don't want to record it 5 times and have tons of macros and say, oh, darn, which one was actually the one that worked? And just delete it as you go along. Consider it practice as you try it out a couple times. And yeah, it'll take a few recordings probably before you get every single one of those keystrokes right. So just have some patience with it and then rejoice greatly once you have it running. Okay, hope that was helpful. Let me know if I need to redo this video. Thanks. Bye.